All right. Well, there might be some other people logging in as we go, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a great agenda. And I'm really looking forward to you guys hearing from our speakers. But first, welcome. Thank you for logging in today. My name is Colleen Christensen. I work with the Lung Cancer Initiative, and this is a part of our community education webinar series. Today, we're talking about clinical trials. We have a great group of speakers, and I'm going to let Paige introduce them. But first, just one quick kind of housekeeping item. Do keep in mind there is a Q&A feature on Zoom here, and please put your questions in that Q&A as we go throughout the program, any questions that come up as you're hearing from our speakers, and we are going to answer all of your questions at the end after everyone has a chance to speak. That's all I had to share. With that, I'll pass it over to Paige Humble, our executive director, and she's going to give a welcome from Lung Cancer Initiative before we get started. Thanks, Paige.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Colleen. And thank you to all of you who are joining today. Certainly, this is such an important topic, learning all about clinical trials. And as Colleen said, we have a wonderful panel for you. And I am going to be so excited to introduce them in just a moment. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Lung Cancer Initiative and some of the events that we have coming up. And first off, today's program and our community education series would not be possible without our sponsors. So we want to say thank you to the Comprehensive Cancer Control Branch of North Carolina, to Genentech, to Bristol Myers Squibb, and to Pfizer. Thank you for making this series possible. Our mission at Lung Cancer Initiative is to advance survivorship and provide support to those affected by lung cancer through research, education, and access programs. And today's program is one example of many for how we carry out that mission. And we really focus in several key areas. We have several research programs. We have a research fellows program with each of the 5 major medical institutions across the state of North Carolina. We also have an innovation in lung cancer grant, and we also have a greater career development grant for someone who's more mid-career. And the goal for these grants is to continue to support people in the field of lung cancer. And for many of their projects, we hope that they're going to go on and continue to receive greater funding from groups like the NIH or American Cancer Society. And it's exciting because we are starting to see that happening as our research programs continue to mature and our researchers continue to mature in the field. We also have survivorship programming. I'll share an event that's coming up, our wellness retreat. We also have survivor luncheons. So every month we have online luncheons for survivors to meet and network with one another. We also have access initiatives. So you may be familiar with our gas card program. This map is representative of one of our goals to support patients through our gas card program in all 100 counties across North Carolina. In addition, we have access grants. So we now call them the REACH grant because we are looking to partner with community organizations across the state to help them do something to facilitate access to clinical trials, to treatment and education about lung cancer and lung cancer screening. And finally, education. Again, our community education series is a great example of this. Also, our advocacy summit. Some of you may have participated in that back in May, where we arm advocates with tools to be even more impactful in their own communities. We also provide provider education. And of course, over the past year, that had to largely be done virtually, but we certainly are planning some educational opportunities for providers across the state as well. I wanted to highlight one upcoming event on September the 18th. It's our Lunge Forward series. And traditionally, these have been held in Charlotte, the Triad, and the Triangle on different dates throughout the year. But this year, we are doing it on one date because it's a great opportunity for us to unite across North Carolina and beyond for a day of awareness and a day to celebrate hope and to honor those who are affected by lung cancer. And you see here, I've got the 3 locations I mentioned, Charlotte, Triad, and the Triangle, and their locations. We have a new event as well that will be held in South Carolina at the Columbia Riverwalk Park. And so that is an event that, if you're in that area, we invite you to join as well. But we also invite you to host your own Lunge Forward event. We are encouraging people to walk wherever they are, to plan events in their own community. So if you're interested, please reach out to one of our staff members and we can tell you more about how to do that. I mentioned our survivorship programs. One program coming up is our annual Survivors Wellness Retreat. We do this in partnership with Wind River Cancer Services. And this year's retreat, although it will largely be virtual, will have an in-person component. So we're really excited about that. You can see the dates here. It all kicks off on August 7th. And the application period is now open, and it is free for lung cancer survivors. So please check that out if you are interested. Also, we have our next community education program coming up next month on July 28th, and it's ASCO updates for patients. And we have offered this for the past few years, and this has been very, very popular. And it's a great chance to hear updates from the annual, the international gathering, which traditionally is held in Chicago. This year was virtual. But it's a great chance to hear from local experts about some of the announcements at ASCO, and also the chance to ask questions about some of the advancements that were shared at the conference. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers today, and I'm going to start with Shalom Sign, and she's going to be our first presenter. She is a project manager at SysScript, responsible for collecting and analyzing data from SysScript's perceptions and insight studies, as well as planning, moderating, and executing patient advisory boards, patient interviews, and various other patient engagement activities. She is also an MPH candidate at Tufts University. Prior to SysScript, Shalom held several positions as a research assistant, focusing on areas such as RNA studies, neuroscience, and memory investigations, and drug development processes. And SysScript is a partner with us in this program, so we appreciate their partnership in bringing this to you all today. Our second presenter is Dr. Neil Reddy. Dr. Reddy is a medical oncologist and researcher at Duke Cancer Institute who specializes in treating patients with lung cancer and head and neck cancer. He is also a member of LCI's Scientific Advisory Committee. And our final speaker is Elizabeth Spate. She's a 3-year survivor of stage 4B non-small cell lung cancer, a mother of 3, a Navy veteran, a nurse anesthetist for 37 years. She has a story of survivorship that is unusual for its critical path of treatment, but indicative of how fast diagnostics and therapeutics are advancing and the critical need for comprehensive genomic testing and clinical trials. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to Shalom, who will start our panel discussion.
Thank you, Paige. I will go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully, if someone wouldn't mind just confirming that the correct screen is shared. Great, thank you. Perfect. Hi again, my name is Shalom. I am a project manager at SysScript. We are the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation. At SysScript, we're dedicated to educating and informing the public, patients, medical and research communities, the media, and policymakers about clinical research and the role each party plays in the process. So I want to thank the Lung Cancer Initiative of North Carolina for having me today. Today, I will be giving an overview of clinical research and clinical trials. So most people don't understand what clinical research is all about. Some people might be afraid, or they might think that clinical research volunteers are treated like guinea pigs, or they still remember past abuses where there were no protections in place for clinical research volunteers. Or like many of us, they have heard stories more recently in the news about clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccines, and they're starting to wonder what clinical trials are all about and how they work. So that's why at SysScript, we believe in education before participation. We think that the more people understand about clinical research, the more they'll appreciate those who are research volunteers and feel empowered to make decisions about their own health. Clinical studies start with a question, like, for example, how well does a new drug work or not work? Is there a better way to treat lung cancer? How do genes affect illness? And do people's environments affect their health? What we learn from clinical research studies improves public health, and researchers can only answer these questions with the help of clinical research volunteers. It's important to understand that being in a clinical trial is not the same as going to your doctor for care. When you go to your doctor, they'll give you treatment that has already been tested and approved by the government. This is called routine or standard of care. However, in a clinical trial, researchers are looking for answers to a question and they're still learning how the new treatment works. So you can't fully understand something by studying just one group of people. And we know things like gender, age, race, and ethnic background. All of these things affect the way that people respond to diseases and treatments. For example, Alzheimer's disease happens twice as often in women compared to men. Type 2 diabetes and asthma are more common in African Americans compared to those who are white, and children respond to drugs differently than adults. So that's why scientists need all different types of people to volunteer for research. Clinical trials can be sponsored by the government, academic medical centers, pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies, or medical device companies. SysGrip is, we don't sponsor any studies, but we simply provide education to people about studies. Research involves a lot of people who do different things, and you can think of them almost like the people on a football team. The principal investigator is like the coach, so they're responsible for organizing and leading the study, as well as recording and studying the data. The PI also directs the team. The research staff members are like the assistant coaches. They help the principal investigator. The clinical research coordinator handles the day-to-day activity at the research site, and they have easy access to the principal investigator, so they're the main contact for volunteers. If you have questions about the trial or your health, you can ask the coordinator. Volunteer protections are in place to help protect the safety of volunteers by making sure that teams follow the rules. These are like the referees of the game. For example, the institutional review boards review the study before it starts. They help keep study volunteers safe and make sure they are given all the information that they need during participation. So now let's talk about the most important members of the team, the research volunteers. These are like the players on a team, and without them, research can't happen. We need all different types of people, again, to participate in clinical research. Your friends and family can also provide you a support system while you are taking part in a study. It's good to talk to your friends and family about the clinical study so they can help you come up with questions and ask your doctor about the study. They can also support you while you participate. In the end, it's your job to make the final decision about whether or not you would like to participate in the study. Everyone has the chance to participate in research. You just have to find a study that's right for you. So let's talk about eligibility first. A 10-year-old, for example, would never be allowed to play on a pro football team. And that's because it would be too dangerous. And just like in sports, clinical trials have what's called eligibility criteria. These are guidelines that say who can and can't be in a study. Eligibility criteria protect people if a trial might be too risky for them. This also helps researchers get results that are correct and mean something. If you're considering a trial, you must be honest with researchers about your health, and lying or hiding information to get into a trial could endanger your safety and ruin the study. So let's assume you're eligible to participate. The informed consent process is designed to answer all your questions and is required by the FDA and IRB. This is one of the most important parts of research, and it's a term that you would hear a lot. Before any volunteer can participate in a trial, they must read, understand, and sign the informed consent form. This is a long form that lists your rights as a volunteer. It includes detailed facts about the trial and describes your job as a volunteer and any procedures or tests you'd need to have. It would warn you about any known or unknown side effects of the study drug, and it describes the benefits of participating in the trial. By signing the form, you're saying that you understand the trial and you're agreeing to what the study asks. The informed consent form is a complex document. The study staff should go through it carefully with you and answer all your questions. You should never feel rushed or pressured to sign this form. It's important to note that the IRB can also ask the researcher to translate the informed consent form to a language that the volunteer speaks. As a research volunteer, you have rights. You have the right to understand the purpose, benefits, risks, and side effects of the clinical trial. You have the right to ask any questions and discuss any concerns with the research staff at any time during the trial. And you have the right to full, complete, and clear answers. Most importantly, you have the right to quit the trial at any time for any reason. You're a volunteer and you're free to leave the trial if you choose to do so. If this is the case, the research staff can help you do this safely. You've heard a lot about clinical trials and your rights and responsibilities as a volunteer, but I'm sure there's still a question of should I participate or not? Deciding to take part in a clinical trial is a personal decision, and what's right for someone else might not be right for you. So when deciding whether or not to participate in clinical research studies, it's important to understand the way that the study is designed. Scientists help set up their studies so that their research will be fair. They also want their research to be accurate and unbiased. In other words, they don't want their own ideas about what they think should happen in a trial to influence the results. To set up fair and unbiased studies, volunteers may be split into different study groups. This is usually done by chance using a computer program, and it's similar to a coin toss. The researcher and volunteer do not get to decide which group the study volunteer will be in, and so this is called a randomized study. Sometimes researchers will go a step further and blind a study. This means that the volunteer and researchers both don't know which treatment the volunteer is receiving. And in some trials, the researchers will use a placebo. A placebo looks like a medicine, but has no medicine in it. Sometimes the placebo is referred to as a sugar pill. What's interesting is that even though the placebo has no medicine in it, there are times when people who are taking a placebo improve or feel better during a trial. And this is called the placebo effect. As a clinical research volunteer, even if you are on a placebo, you will be closely monitored. So deciding whether or not to participate in a clinical trial is an important and personal decision. And here are some reasons why people say they get involved in research. Some people get involved to get access to brand new therapies that are not yet available on the market, or to advance science and help others with their condition, or they want to be monitored closely and they know that on a clinical trial, the research staff will observe your health closely. And also, when it comes to compensation, some but not all trials will pay for volunteers' travel costs and pay you for your time and commitment. The amounts vary widely, and at CISGRIP, we believe that getting paid should never be your only reason for volunteering, and you should consider all the possible benefits of participation. All research involves risk because, again, we're asking a question and don't necessarily know what will happen. Researchers do their best to ensure that you are safe, but there are no guarantees. So you need to be comfortable with the risks that you might experience. For example, there could be physical risks. You might not get better, or there might be some undesirable side effects that make you feel uncomfortable. There could be some emotional risks. For example, some clinical trials may ask you to take a quality of life survey to see how you're doing, and some of these questions can be upsetting or cause distress. There could be a financial risk. So sometimes there are out-of-pocket expenses such as parking, childcare, and missing work. Additionally, there could be risks to privacy and confidentiality. Usually your health information is private, and when you agree to participate in research, you are giving permission for researchers to collect information about you. However, it's also important to note that researchers must follow rules that protect your privacy and your information throughout the study. It's important that all of your doctors know if you're in a clinical trial. The trial will require your time and commitment, and volunteering takes time and effort, so be sure you have the time to participate. And if you don't, you can just let the study staff know that it's not a good time. Again, you can always stop your participation and volunteer in other ways or in future research. The clinical trial could also end at any time. Even if you want to continue to participate, your doctor or the company making the drug could stop the study. So be sure to ask questions about this when you sign the informed consent form at the beginning. Many volunteers drop out of studies because they didn't fully understand what they were signing up for. Both the volunteers and the research suffer when this happens. So at CISGRIP, we like to say education before participation. Do your homework and learn about the trial and ask questions. Read all the information provided by the study staff. You might even go online to research the treatment being studied. Take your time. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking a researcher to slow down or explain something using simpler words. And ask questions. So talk about your concerns with the study staff, your doctor, and your friends and family. Bring a family member to study visits or a friend so they can ask questions too. You can also try tape recording your visits or taking notes so that you can refer to that information later. If you decide to join a study, you should feel confident that you have made an informed choice, and you should feel comfortable that the trial staff will support you and answer all your questions. If you're thinking about participating in a clinical trial, Again, it's important to talk to your doctor, friends and family, and the clinical trial team to make sure it's right for you. On this slide are some examples of questions to ask before you decide to participate, but you might find that you have many more as well. And again, it's good to gather lots of information about the trial before you decide to participate. Here's a handy way to think about it at every step. It's your decision at every step. So you start by becoming aware of a certain study and you think you're interested, so you discuss it with your doctor. If you're still interested, you need to know all the details, so you talk to the research staff and find out whether you're eligible. If it sounds like something that's right for you, you can choose to sign the informed consent form. But even when you're taking part in the study, continue to ask questions and decide whether you choose to complete the study or not. Informed consent is an ongoing process, not a one-time deal. So you can remember that today's presentation is an important first step, and now it's up to you to learn more about clinical trials. The best place to start is with your doctor. You can ask them if they know of any clinical trials that might be good for you. You can also get information from your local research center, disease advocacy groups, medical journals and conferences, and there are also a number of websites devoted to clinical trials, and they're listed here on this slide for your reference. In conclusion, research volunteers truly are medical heroes without whom medical science cannot move forward. So I'd like to sincerely thank you for taking the time today to learn about the clinical research process, and I strongly encourage you to share what you've heard today with your friends, family, and people throughout your community. Thanks so much.
Shalom, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. So many good tidbits, and we, like I said at the beginning, we recorded this, and so we'll put it on our YouTube channel. And I wholeheartedly agree. If you think of friends or family that might benefit from some of this information, you definitely can share that recording with them in the future. So thanks again. And we're going to go ahead and transition. Elizabeth, if you're ready, we would love to transition to you sharing your story as a survivor and as a clinical trial volunteer about what that was like, how you made that decision, and what that journey has looked like for you. So I'll pass it over to you, Elizabeth. And I think you're muted. I don't know if you knew that.
Okay, I'm off now.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen. Well, before I start, I'm going to let everybody know that I woke up with baggy eyes because I hadn't slept a wink, worried about speaking for my first time in public. And then I took myself into the bathroom and chewed myself out and said, "You've been living with cancer for 3 years. Get out there and tell somebody your story." So maybe it can be helpful to somebody here today. And I'm pretty honored and humbled that you asked me to share my personal story and my clinical trial experience today. And I hope that it's helpful to anybody with cancer who may be in the decision-making process regarding their care, or perhaps reevaluating their current care and considering a clinical trial. And my life abruptly changed on November 17th in 2017. While on call as a nurse anesthetist at Cohen's Women's Hospital, I developed chest and neck pain. I went to the emergency room after my shift, and a CT scan showed that I had a large lung mass attached to my heart and chest wall. After multiple diagnostic tests, I was told that I had stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer that was non-curable and would be rapidly terminal. I had metastatic lesions to the lymph nodes around my thoracic aorta, my brain, my spine, my hips, my liver, and my kidneys. I was told with my extensive disease, I had perhaps 4 months to live. I was devastated. I had never smoked, and I lived under the impression that non-smokers didn't get lung cancer. Certainly no physician I had ever seen for my annual screenings had ever told me that I was at risk, or that they indicated that I needed to be tested for any lung cancer. In an attempt to leave no stone unturned, my oncologist at Cone Cancer Center, Dr. Mohammed, sent a part of my tumor for comprehensive biomarker or genomic testing. This would prove to be the critical decision in my care that led to my survival story, as it was the segue for my eventual participation in a clinical trial for a novel drug. Because I had such a burden of cancer, they began radiation treatments to my brain and systemic chemotherapy in an attempt to palliate my symptoms. The genomic testing came back and provided information that I did have a driver mutation, RET KIV5B to be exact, but it wasn't actionable. There was no existing targeted therapy. I was left with palliative treatment only. Unbeknownst to me, my husband, through panicked in the middle of the night research, found a physician who was studying the Rett driver mutation. Upon calling his office, we were told a clinical trial was about to start, and he would be willing to see me in consultation. I was already unable to breathe or walk any distance, and we used a wheelchair to get me about when we flew to see him. The oncologist, Dr. Justin Gaynor, walked into the room and calmly sat down and asked, "What would we like to know?" He then took out a piece of paper and began to draw my genetic mutation and described how it drove my cancer cells. He told me that there was no available effective targeted treatment. He was at once both encouraging and not. He understood my mutation and the protein it created that drove my cancer. There was a clinical trial opening in phase 1, but because I had not failed the conventional treatment, 4 rounds of chemotherapy, I couldn't be included in the study as there was no evidence that the trial drug would be any better than the conventional treatment. It was only for RET mutated cancers that had failed traditional therapy. So we got back on the plane and flew home. I managed to survive the 3 more rounds of chemotherapy, the toll it took on my body organs, and was still alive enough to qualify for inclusion in the drug trial. And so my clinical trial experience began. We flew to MGH and I was given a room which had a picture window, a television, a hospital bed, a lounge chair for my husband to be there and keep me company. I was offered food and drinks during treatment, and I was truly kept quite comfortable. Frequent lab work and EKGs were performed throughout the day to monitor the drug levels in my blood and its effects on me. The attention to my well-being reassured me of the high quality of care I was receiving. At the end of each long day in this targeted therapy lab, I was able to leave the hospital and rest overnight in my hospital room. The process repeated itself daily for the next week. Side effects from the drug, yes, I did and still do have side effects. Any side effects I had were immediately addressed and have been quite manageable. The staff were professional at all times, kind, caring, and courteous. My care then and ever since has consisted of a small army, my oncologist, a nurse practitioner, several RNs, and a technician. They willingly receive and address any questions or concerns I have and still may have. After several days, we flew home to North Carolina and began my oral medication from home. For the next year, I would fly weekly to MGH and begin my oral medication, and have my physical exams, lab work, and testing. And every 2 months, I had a CT and MRI. A year passed and I was still alive. And so I graduated. I only had to have my visits to MVH once a month, and my MRI and CTs were moved back 3 to 3 months. During the pandemic this year, the drug trial continued without any pause, any glitch in my care whatsoever. Innovative ways of patient management were created, and already my previous established collaboration with my local oncologist assured continuity of care. It's now been 3 years since I started my drug trial, not with my health restored, but with my cancer held in check. The average time for the cancer to resist the drug is 18 months, and I am at 38 months. I'm a true outlier in medical terms, and I'm bending the curve in a positive fashion for survivors. I consider it my job. I know now that people with lung cancer who have RET mutation no longer have to have their brain radiated or endure toxic chemotherapy and live with the side effects as I do. They can simply start taking the medication proven effective during my clinical trial. And I know that the RET mutation has been found in thyroid, pancreatic, and colon cancers, perhaps even more. I can't believe my drug is also helping people with cancers and other organs live longer. And I've often wondered what my purpose here is on earth. But knowing that perhaps I've helped save lives or perhaps change lives, is extremely rewarding. Here's this good part. What do I get out of it and what's in it for you? My husband and I smile when we think of our 3 children and what we call the race to the altar. I'm sorry, I always get choked up because they wanted to share their wedding with their mother. They were all married within 14 months, record time, after I got diagnosed. I got to witness and participate in all their ceremonies. My first grandchild was born the following year, and my second one just this April. I was able to celebrate my mother's 95th birthday. And this year, my husband and I will celebrate on December 24th, our 30th wedding anniversary. I've quit going through my closets to spare my children from having to do it at my death. Instead, I've decided to repaint the insides of my house and refresh it. And I supervised my husband digging the holes and planting 3 new rose bushes off the front of my porch so I can look at them every morning when I'm drinking my tea. My life is different. I live a new normal. But I now have hope. And that's what I want for you. To no longer face certain death as I once did, but to learn to live your life with cancer. The miraculous leaps in treatment of lung cancer from previous research helped me immensely. And I will be forever grateful to those who forged the way before me. And I believe in miracles, and several of them occurred in my story. Things just didn't happen by themselves. Listen to your heart and keep an open eye for your miracles and continue to have hope always. And thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing. I was smiling and tearing up all at the same time. That was so heartwarming. And it's just great to hear how the clinical trial has given you hope and also given you purpose in helping others. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And just a reminder to everyone logged on, if you have any questions that come up, do be sure to put it in the Q&A, and we'll have a chance to answer those questions at the end. But now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Reddy. Dr. Reddy, thanks for being here. And we're excited to hear from you as a healthcare provider, to hear more about what clinical trials look like from your side of things.
Well, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? All right. So I'm a medical oncologist at Duke. Most of my practice is taking care of patients with some form of lung cancer. And that can be anywhere from early stage, like stage 1, stage 2 patients that are having surgery, to patients who are receiving medical therapy. And a lot of what I do is clinical trials. So I write clinical trials, I run clinical trials that run the gamut from treatments that are trying to improve outcomes for patients who have surgery, trying to improve outcomes for patients who are getting radiation-based treatment, and for giving various forms of either oral molecular therapy or some of the new immune therapies. And you know, at any big research place, you know, doing the clinical research is a major part of what we do, because that's how we move forward. That's how we improve standards of care. And you know, the clinical trial process is complex. It goes all the way from making discoveries in the laboratory where some compound is identified that looks like it might be beneficial, to testing it in animals, identifying what you think is the right dose, doing laboratory experiments with cell lines and in mice, looking at testing different cancer types to then try to identify, well, what type of cancer should this new potential therapy be tested in and then taking it into the clinic. So it's very complex, and we're always trying to balance safety and helping patients. So the clinical trial process in the US is very rigorous. And sometimes that rigorousness can lead to frustration. I think that one of the big moves now within clinical research is trying to make eligibility criteria not as restrictive, so that we don't exclude people from clinical trials for reasons that aren't critical. And I think, a major focus of what we do is trying to explain clinical trials to people, because it is complex, to try to engage people, help people to understand where they are in the course of their treatments, and discuss what standard of care is available, and also how that compares to clinical trial options, and that is really complex. So we have a whole team of people here working on these things. So we have folks that specialize in doing all the regulatory components, research nurses, research pharmacists that handle the experimental compounds, and then obviously the physicians and nurses and nurse practitioners and physicians assistants who are dealing directly with the patient, with people who are contemplating going on clinical trials. People going on clinical trials not only benefit themselves, people going on clinical trials is what allows us to make advances in the field. As Ms. Spate was suggesting, not only did her going on clinical trial benefit her, it helped all the people coming after her with lung cancer and other cancers of that same variety, because all these breakthroughs that have been made, all these good treatments we have to offer people now would not be available if people had not gone on clinical trials on the past and kind of paid it forward to the folks in the future who years later, people that they would perhaps even never know, were diagnosed with cancer. So it's this this whole process over many years of people going on clinical trials, hopefully helping themselves, but also helping all the folks with cancer coming after them in the future. It'd be impossible in a few minutes to say everything there is to know about clinical trials, and get into some very complex issues. It might be helpful. I'll ask the LCI staff that would it be best to kind of get into questions and discussion, or do you all folks have any questions specifically for me, so I just don't kind of ramble on?
I do have some questions to just kind of kick us off, and I think that's a good idea. I have some questions that people might be thinking of, but like Elizabeth, and I don't know if Elizabeth, your drug has gone off the trial yet, but I'm wondering when the drug does, become available and FDA approved, how does that transition work? And even like from a financial perspective, I know in the clinical trial it's being paid for, then does it switch to your insurance? And just kind of what do you see with that transition? And Dr. Reddy, you can start it, and then if anyone else wants to chime in.
Usually a drug would continue to be supplied for a very significant period of time. We've had the fortunate problem in some cases of somebody who'd been on an agent for 5 years or so, to the point where the trial actually closed, like completely closed. And in that situation, if the drug had already been approved for a couple of years, sometimes then people would switch over to commercial drug. But usually, so just because an agent gets FDA approved, generally the company would continue to supply it for a prolonged period of time. And in general, it's an unusual scenario where that gets switched.
Well, in my case, I can't respond to any difficulty with that because I still remain in the study. They need me for long term now, and I'm in it with them because I want to keep bending the curve. So I'm still in the trial. It's still a trial study for them, a drug study. And even though it has come on the market, selpercatinib, or I think they call it remdesivir, but selpercatinib originally was called Loxo 292, and then it was sold to a different company, and that's its new name, and it's out there and it can help people, and they can all start immediately to take it and not have to have the enormous brain fog that I live with.
So usually in a clinical trial, so in a clinical trial with a certainly with a non-approved agent, the agent itself will be supplied to the patient free of charge. There can sometimes be, for intravenous drugs, there can sometimes be, for any of these clinical trials, there can sometimes be other costs associated with the clinical trial. So unfortunately, if somebody goes on a clinical trial, it's not that all the expenses are covered. There are some standard things like some blood work, some x-rays and whatnot that may be billed to insurance. So there are some things that are covered and there's some things that aren't. And that if someone's going on a clinical trial, it's important to ask very specifically what is provided and what is not covered, just so that you're well informed going into it.
I have another question. So like Elizabeth, she traveled for her trial, and I'm wondering, Dr. Reddy, you as a provider, do you know of trials that you're not participating in at Duke? And like, do you refer patients to other places too, if you know of a trial? And how, I guess, do patients need to kind of research this on their own and be looking for trials, or are you keeping track of that?
So it's impossible for anyone to keep track of all the clinical trials that are going on everywhere. And no institution can pragmatically open every like clinical lung cancer trial that's out there. Many of them are redundant, and it's impossible. So in general, we would look, if someone came up with a biomarker, like if evaluation of somebody's tumor came up with a biomarker, like a RET fusion, for instance, and we didn't have that available, then in general, yes, we would look for a clinical trial for that. A very good resource is clinicaltrials.gov, which is a government website where you can put in a couple of key indicators, like you'd put in lung cancer and RET fusion, and it would give you a list of trials available all over the world that would meet those criteria. That can be a little bit difficult to interpret. Sometimes the trial's open, sometimes it's not open to accrual. Sometimes it's not for your stage of cancer, or different, it's not in the line of therapy, but it's a very useful resource as a screening tool to identify potential trials. In a place like North Carolina, we tend to stay aware. Like I would be aware, for instance, of what's open at UNC, and the folks over at Dr. Weiss and Dr. Picot and Carrie Lee would know what we have open at Duke. And if we have trials that would be good for patients at either institution, we'll send patients back and forth. As an example, we have a small cell lung cancer trial that's open here that isn't open over there, and the physicians over there have sent several patients over here for that. in the not too distant past, there was a clinical trial over at UNC that was for a specific biomarker. Like maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago, they had a BRAF trial open, and I had a patient with BRAF lung cancer, and I referred them over there for that trial. And sort of same thing with Wake Forest. So I think that like the academic lung cancer doctors here kind of stay aware of what the other institutions have open, and send patients back and forth depending on what would be best for them. But it's impossible to keep track of like every trial that's open at MD Anderson, every trial that's open at Memorial Sloan Kettering.
I'd like to add something else, if I may, about the traveling that you asked about. I was very fortunate, and it's my husband and I were able to pay for our first flight up there. But when we got there and were put into the trial, the drug experiment, the company went ahead and helped reimburse for all of those expenses and in our future. They want to make, we're helping them. I'm donating me. And it works both ways. They helped us. So I want to let people know that there's not a financial burden there, because the drug company, they arranged my flights, they paid for my hotel, they gave me a card that would cover taxi or Uber rides and my meals. And it did not place any financial burden on us at all. And I just want that to be clarified, because there are many people that probably couldn't do that or wouldn't think they could do that. But, it was very, very good, because it was very helpful. We didn't have to break into our retirement funds.
So in general, the pharma company trials will cover traveling expenses, meals, sometimes hotel, to a greater or lesser degree. I think that your experience actually getting help with airfare and all that was extraordinary. That's really good. But most of the pharma trials will help with expenses to a greater or lesser degree. In general, the NIH funded trials do not have sufficient money to help with those sorts of things. And what we call investigator-initiated trials, like trials that we may have written at Duke and that we are running here kind of on a shoestring budget, for those sorts of trials, we would not have sufficient funds to help with other expenses. So it varies a bit. And that's another thing to ask about. And that's when you're being considered for a clinical trial.
And I have one more question, and then others can jump in. But so it's for Elizabeth and then Dr. Reddy. But Elizabeth, just kind of how do you make that decision? Because in your case, for me, it probably still wasn't an easy decision, but there was no other option, and so it's a new drug. But then Dr. Reddy, I'm sure you have patients that there are multiple options. So it's a clinical trial, or it's this or that. And so I guess Elizabeth first, just how did you make that decision? And then Dr. Reddy, if you'll kind of give some examples too, and just how easy or hard it is to make these decisions. I'm sure it's not easy.
To make the decision to be a participant in the clinical trial? Okay. Well, by the third chemotherapy, I didn't have any response to it anymore, my tumor. The fourth systemic chemotherapy treatment, I believe I had 0.1 millimeter or something on a node that showed response, and that was it. So my time, I knew, was up, because I was actively functioning and working. I was on call at the hospital, and boom, I hit a wall like a Mack truck. And overnight, I became extremely sick, extremely ill, and compromised. And we knew that there was no other option. And you know, we even mentioned it to my oncologist, who I adore and love here in North Carolina. But because it hadn't started, but just started, he wasn't sure he would recommend it to me. And, you know, my husband and I had thought about it. The first thing he did say to me was to pray for a genetic mutation biomarker. And I was way ahead of him on that. We were praying way before then. We knew what we were getting up against. And when the mutation biomarker came back and it was red, that was 1 to 2% of all lung cancers, and nobody had even really looked at it yet. And to find this guy that had planned on commencing with a study, we just felt like that was the only option left, because quite honestly, I loved life. I love to live, and I really miss being a productive citizen. I'm doing good with what I am doing now, but we wanted to do that opportunity because I just frankly wasn't ready to give up yet. I still had hope. And that's what I want everybody to do. And that's what I was trying to say today.
So I think the decision making around clinical trials can be very complex and highly variable. So you're at one end of the spectrum, you might have a new molecular therapy for a target, and that the emerging evidence is that it's highly effective with modest toxicity, like the selpercatinib for RET. So that's a good example of that. And then that's a pretty easy decision. And then there are other scenarios where there may be a standard of care A that is a pretty reasonable standard of care, and there's a new combination therapy that for various reasons we think might be better, but we don't know. You know, and then going on a clinical trial that might randomize between those two options. You know, it may be a very good clinical trial to go on, but it's not so straightforward. You know, then you'd be into a lot of things to think about. And then there are other scenarios where perhaps somebody has been on several treatments over the years, and the number of standard treatments, and their oncologist has told them that the likelihood that one of the standard options would benefit them is low. And then the person might be looking at phase 1 trials where the chance of benefit is there, but it's not real high. It's really kind of unknown. And then whether to go on that clinical trial, which is going to take some of your time up, maybe expose you to side effects, versus being at the point where you decide not to continue anti-cancer therapy and let God and nature take their course and focus on spending quality time with your family and friends entirely, can be a difficult decision. So, you know, sometimes it's obvious that, gee, there's a great new option available, highly effective, modest side effects. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are clinical trials that provide hope and have a chance of benefit, but the chance is not so high that you might decide not to choose that option, and you might choose to use the time that you have left in a different way.
If I could add, I know that when I've spoken to some patients in the past, they've said that if they do find themselves having multiple options, it can be difficult to even know where to start. So one thing I would say is to even Google. I know that there are resources out there on Googling just questions to ask, so that you know which questions to start with. And then that can be a good kind of starting point if you find that you do have these options, maybe discussing them with your doctor or the study staff or somebody else who knows. And then that will give you just kind of at least somewhere to start in having that conversation. I also wanted to add that I know to your point, Dr. Reddy, about clinicaltrials.gov, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to read. It's a very comprehensive resource. SysScript does have a search clinical trials function. You can find it on searchclinicaltrials.org. So if that's helpful, you can visit searchclinicaltrials.org and we will kind of go through clinicaltrials.gov for you and see what we can find.
And I think another important aspect of clinical research is that for people, I've had several people say to me that by going on a clinical trial, they really felt that they were doing something positive and affirmative that they found great value in. And that in and of itself, beyond the direct benefit that that person might get from the therapy, they found very important and found very meaningful. So I think that's another important component about clinical research is helping mankind and helping people coming after them in the future with cancer.
I'd like to say something about that. I had been in medicine for 43 years in some capacity. And when I became ill, I never in my life ever thought, well, I'm going to donate my body to science. But when I became ill and I had no other option, I thought, why not? I mean, the last sentences I said was I was so grateful to the people who went before me and forged the way with the exploding research that's been happening in the last few years and made my 3 years existence possible. So yes, I actually feel like I can't go to work anymore, and I'm okay with that now. I'm 67, so I would have been thinking about slowing down anyway, you know, but I still feel like maybe I can help somebody. And that really felt good to know that this RET mutation has been found. What an eye opener for me in so many different other organs. And so look at the poor pancreatic population that just couldn't get enough people together in a clinical trial to even get started before they all would perish. So maybe now we can help people, you know, I can do that. I mean, through my participation. So that's it.
Thanks for sharing. And I really appreciate all of your input. This is such a great conversation. There is one question that came through that I want to throw out there before we wrap up here. This, I think, is directed for Dr. Reddy. How should patients discuss with their community oncologists they want to be referred to academic centers for clinical trials when their doctor only wants to treat them with chemo and hesitant to refer a patient for a second opinion?
So, you know, patients shouldn't be shy about asking for that. They will be their own best advocate. And community-based physicians need not, they should not be defensive or in any way inhibiting people from going on getting a second opinion. It's a complex issue. I think that patients have no reason to feel guilty or self-conscious about asking to go and getting another opinion. So that's key. At a place like Duke, you know, I will have people say, well, I'm going to get an opinion at MD Anderson and Memorial Sloan Kettering, which are, you know, bigger cancer centers at obviously bigger cities. And I don't, you know, it doesn't and shouldn't bother me. I generally try to dissuade people from going for an unlimited number of opinions. So, you know, going to 10 or 10 places, I think just will drive people crazy and confuse them. So I think going for second opinions, third opinions, whatever you feel is necessary is really a positive thing and a good thing. Patients shouldn't be shy about asking for it. Providers shouldn't in any way make people feel badly or shouldn't make them feel that they need to have second thoughts about it. So I would say that don't be shy. If it's natural for people to be a little bit shy about asking, and it's natural for a provider to feel a little bit to have a little bit of negative feelings that someone's going for another opinion. But at the end of the day, if your provider really tries to make somebody feel that it's not appropriate for them to get another opinion, then they need a different provider.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reddy. And thank you. That was a great question. So thank you. And I know we are a little over time, but I just want to say another thank you to all of our panelists today. Very, very great resources shared. And Dr. Reddy, thank you so much for your perspectives. Shalom. I appreciate what you shared from SysScript. And I don't know if there's anything we can share with participants afterward, that list of resources you shared, but certainly would like to do that if we're able. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing your story and just being so open. I know you probably impacted all of us that are here today. You certainly impacted me. So thank you very, very much for being a part of today's panel. And I hope you'll all be able to join us in July for our updates after ASCO. And great to see you all. Thank you for joining.